through these fairly rapidly to get through all of our slides in the time allotted to us. But the agenda we have in front of us is I will do an introduction. I want to talk a little bit about impact, economic impact in this region, both the impact that we are enjoying now and also the negative impact that we would experience if the most dramatic and drastic option is chosen under Army 2020. We'll look at both of those. Quality of life measures, various kinds, education and many other issues. Land use, which is an extremely important issue we know for many installations. It certainly is here, and we have a good answer for that. Transportation and infrastructure. Community mission support, which is a great place to end up before I have some conclusions and some recommendations. So that will start our briefing. Please, if you would go to the next slide. Well, for those, particularly Lieutenant Colonel Tilson, who may not know much about our region, we decided to draw you a map. And as you can see from the outline, the four-county region that surrounds Fort Leonard Wood is what we call the greater Fort Leonard Wood community. It has a population of about 116,000 people, and it has some major cities. You've seen some of them and experienced some when you were here before: Rolla, Lebanon, St. Robert, Waynesville, Houston, and many others, many other great communities in our region. Fort Leonard Wood is about 62,000 acres in Pulaski County, bordering other counties in the region, but it's right in the middle of our region. We also have Interstate 44 that goes by our front door, and as we'll show you later in our presentation, we're actually very, very close to lots and lots of other places, St. Louis, Kansas City, and the rest of the world, by our excellent transportation system that exists. I-44 is just one out the front side of the post. Wanted to make sure that we drew you a picture and told you a little bit about our region. We think it's extremely important to know where we are and who we are. If you go to the next slide, please. I indicated that we want to talk a little bit about economic impact, both in the region and in the state. Deputy Director Jason Hall a few moments ago talked about the study that the state has undertaken with support from the General Assembly to look at defense spending in Missouri and its impact on our state, on its communities, and on our installations in Missouri. They've done a very good job with that. That report is actually out on the web and can be read by anybody. But from that report, we have come to some conclusions, and I wanted to provide some data here that probably will surprise you just a little bit. The total economic output of Fort Leonard Wood personnel spending, that's not on bricks and mortar, that's just personnel spending, was about $2.1 billion last year, of which household earnings were about $1.2 billion of that amount. That's actually the amount of money people brought home to support their families and do the things that have to be done in our communities. That's an astoundingly large figure, and sometimes we just don't recognize how large they are. The operation of Fort Leonard Wood supported about 36,400 direct and indirect jobs in the state of Missouri. We're not just about 10,000 permanent party on Fort Leonard Wood. There's the people we see on a daily basis, and they're the core and the heart of Fort Leonard Wood, but there are about 25,000 other people who are actually supported by those jobs here on Fort Leonard Wood. That's something that we want to make sure that we get across. It's both direct and indirect jobs, and it's an impact on our region and on our state government and our state as a whole. And then finally, out-of-state visitors who come to Fort Leonard Wood are an important part of our state, our economy, regionally in particular, and it's something that we forget about. Fort Leonard Wood trains roughly 100,000, or last year trained roughly 100,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guard members, Marines, and others. And many families and dependents and others actually came here to see them graduate, achieve new milestones in their careers. And that figure is absolutely astounding in that there was $57 million generated in Missouri last year, which results in about $167 million in total economic output in our state, just because of those visitors who came to Missouri. And by the way, it supported 1,500 jobs in Missouri. Those are astounding figures, and they are because of Fort Leonard Wood, its mission, and the people who come to participate in that mission here. We wanted to make sure that we gave you a snapshot. There's a whole lot of other figures that we can tell you, but those are ones that were very significant to us. Go to the next slide, please. Well, that's the positive side. Let me talk about the negative side just a moment. As Congresswoman Hartzler said a few moments ago, if the option is taken to reduce the permanent party at Fort Leonard Wood by approximately 40%, this is the dire option, This is what the Army's own analysis, ma'am, as you know, says. I might add that one of the counties in our slide, Texas County, was left off of the study. We added it. And frankly, our footnote will tell you that. We added it using the same terminology and the same methodology. And it would mean about 10,000 fewer people living in the Fort Leonard Wood region if this dire option were chosen. 4,800 fewer jobs, and you see the breakdown by county. Sales would go down almost $170 million, and also total income down about $170 million. We based these figures directly out of the Army's own study, and we certainly stand by them. We certainly don't want to see these come to pass, but this is the ugly picture. I told you about the very good economic news from what we're enjoying now. We know that the federal government must reduce spending in the Army. We understand that. We hope that the most dire option does not occur here, because this is the picture of what that impact will be. Go to the next one, please. Well, we think this is a wonderful place to live. We think this is a wonderful place to work, and we think this is a wonderful place for the Army to do business. And in fact, we're going to tell you why this is the best place for the Army to do business in the United States. We are absolutely convinced that we can stack up to any other location, and we'll show you the figures that do back up that assumption. Well, first of all, let me talk about cost of living. Cost of living is an extremely important issue. We all try to balance our checkbooks every day. Army obviously has to make a good investment in places that are not very high cost. And frankly, there's a lot of data out there that compares our area, the Fort Leonard Wood area, with lots of other areas. And this is the way it looks. Our friends from Fort Huachuca, and I'm not beating on Fort Huachuca, are at the top of our list here, slightly above the national cost of living average. And you see the U.S. average of 100 on this chart. Fort Leonard Wood is at 87. So another way you could look at that is Fort Leonard Wood is only 87% as expensive in this cost of living basket of goods and services as the national average, and it is substantially less than some other installations. We think those are just great figures that support what we all know, which is it's a good value to live in the Fort Leonard Wood region. Go to the next slide, please. I told you I was going to talk about quality of life, and one of the most important things that we can do for our families and for our region is to have good schools. And we have good schools in spades in this region. And I'm going to show you over the next few slides what that looks like. And in fact, Dr. Judine Blackburn, the superintendent of the Waynesville R6 school district, will get up here a little bit later on and have a few more comments, and also recognize some other school leaders in the audience. But Fort Leonard Wood area schools are committed to the Army. They certainly provide educations to Army dependents, and they're a fabric of our community that we're awfully proud of. So this list does list all of the school districts in the area. These school districts all work together on an ongoing basis, and as you can see, the largest of those is Waynesville, the Waynesville R6 school district. Varying levels of military impact and impacted aid that comes to those districts, but this gives you a picture of all the districts that have a stake in elementary and secondary education in this area. Go to the next slide, please. Well, I mentioned the Waynesville R6 school district, and I want to drill down just a little bit into some of the details here. I'm awfully proud of what the district was able to do to come up with this data. First of all, there are about 6,000 students. That's a huge local school district, by the way, by any standards across the country. But about, of those 6,000 students, about 75% are military impacted, and about 60% of that is military dependents. It is a military-based school, and frankly, it is intertwined with the needs and the wishes and the wants of the U.S. Army in particular, and that tells the story right there. The school district is the second largest employer in Pulaski County. It has 778 employees, and you can see the salaries. They're quite high. They support the area, and a payroll of about $48 million. By our standards in Missouri, that's very high. An estimated 10% are veterans, military spouses, and active duty. I know one of the Army's aims is to make sure that dependents and spouses actually have employment where they're stationed. The Waynesville School District does a good job of making sure, doing their part, that that's the case. Go to the next slide, please. Well, we know that the numbers certainly don't lie, and another issue that doesn't lie is the progress in the district. The progress in the district in terms of facilities, academic rigor, and also staffing. The Waynesville School District has academic excellence, high graduation rates. I'm going to show you some data in a moment. A lot of new construction. Construction about $100 million in the past 10 years. Facilities that are as good or better than any other facilities of its kind in the country. That's just a fact. Ample room for growth and expansion in the future if, in fact, the Army and other services choose to be here in greater numbers. We hope that's the case. There, in particular, is a new elementary early childhood education center that I know the district's very proud of. Many athletic facilities improvements, again, rivaling some colleges and universities. Just an absolutely excellent facility and place to do academic achievement. Go to the next slide, please. Probably the most telling slide of anything that we can say about education. My two kids graduated from high school several years ago, but one of the things I looked at was their ACT score and obviously whether they graduated from high school. They did, and they've gone off and done good things. But we just happened to look at other school districts from around the country that were connected to military installations, particularly Army installations, and we found out some interesting things. We found out that Fort Leonard Wood's school ACT rates, their scores, this is actually 2011 figures, and also the graduation rates from the school are among the highest in the country. I think that's something to be very proud of. The slide speaks for itself. I won't speak ill about any other place, but Fort Leonard Wood and its schools are near the top of that list. Go to the next slide, please. It's a good news, bad news kind of message I'm delivering here. Here's the bad news. Good news is that the school district does a good job, hires lots of people, turns out very qualified and talented students. The bad news is if the Army selects the most dire option for downsizing, there is a tremendous loss that will occur. The projection is 3,700 K through 12 students will leave the school district. It's predicted that there will be a decrease in K-12 student enrollment of the amount that you see. And by the way, these are ranges based on different demographic assumptions. Total decrease in teacher and staff positions between 270 and 350. And the total annual salary benefits decrease of between $16 and $22 million. That's the bad news. The bad news is it will hurt. It'll hurt badly. And unfortunately, it may impact the ability of the school district to deliver the great results we talked about a few moments ago. Well, those are our local school districts. We're proud of them in the region. We're proud of them locally. They support the Army well. Let me switch to higher education. If you go to the next slide, please. We met presidents and directors from our colleges and universities, leadership of our University of Missouri system and campus at MS&T in Rolla a few moments ago. Let me tell you about how that education manifests itself here at Fort Leonard Wood. It's important to know that every installation around the country has some connectivity to universities. We know that. Our connectivity to universities is singularly great. We think that our relationship is wonderful in the area of higher education. And let me tick off some of the facts. There are 6 colleges and universities that teach courses, 72 of them, in fact, on Fort Leonard Wood through the Truman Education Center, with about 11,000 enrolled. Last year, there were 730 degrees earned, and the year before that, 897, which ranks it roughly about the 6th largest degree granting institution in the state if it was all in the same place. That's big. That's huge. Each year, about 150 captains, United States Army captains, earn master's degrees from the Missouri University of Science and Technology, MS&T, primarily engineer. We're proud of that. University of Missouri Technology Parks, both one here on Fort Leonard Wood, where my office is, and also one at MS&T in Rolla, support entrepreneurs and small businesses. There are 2 university liaisons who are actually on post here, who work representing the university, and about $50 million in federal research expenditures just at the University of Missouri alone, much of that defense related. We do have certainly a view towards supporting defense. And then finally, here in Missouri, we not only have really great classes taught locally, we also have access to world-class research universities. I mentioned the University of Missouri in its 4 campuses, that's Kansas City, St. Louis, Rolla, MS&T, and the flagship campus in Columbia. But we also have Washington University in St. Louis and also St. Louis University in St. Louis, all world-class institutions that provide access to research. Go to the next slide, if you would, please. Another measure of quality of life is healthcare. Access to healthcare is something that all of us, whether we be in uniform or we be families or whether we be just members of the community, we have to have access to wonderful healthcare. And I'm happy to say that we have very, very good coverage and very good healthcare affordability and also availability in this region. And as you see, we have 4 hospital complexes and numerous outpatient clinics that serve the needs of soldiers, dependents, and the residents of this region. Happy to note that those healthcare leaders in our region are actually talking together right now in a cooperative kind of spirit to try to figure out how to make the healthcare dollar go farther. Whether it is government-based healthcare dollars or private healthcare dollars, they're working together in an effort around the Sustainable Ozarks Partnership to try to figure out how to plug healthcare gaps and to try to come up with new solutions. And we're awfully proud of them. We think that there will be some good things to come from that. We have new construction ongoing. We have some opportunities for new clinics, and you'll see many of them here in the future. But we wanted to show you this picture of what healthcare looked like in the region. I want to make sure that I don't forget about the Warrior Transition Unit. Warrior Transition Unit is not a community asset as much as it is an Army asset, but it corresponds with the community through many different programs, and we're happy to have the Warrior Transition Unit here at Fort Leonard Wood. And for those of you who don't know, the WTU does not just serve this region, Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. It serves many states. And in fact, we're happy to note that many, many people have their eyes on the Warrior Transition Unit on an ongoing basis. Go to the next slide, if you would. Housing. Housing is another staple in the quality of life. I'm not going to go through all these statistics, but we have a very stable housing market in this region. We have some good metrics here to tell you that housing is affordable, it is high quality, and it is stable. Those are excellent indicators for anybody wanting to locate to this region, and we would hope that the Army would take into account the fact that we have the housing stock available here. It is high quality, and it is relatively low cost, and we believe it will stay that way going forward. Switch to the next slide, if you would, please. Our 2 state leaders who are here today, and also our Missouri Military Preparedness Enhancement Commission, and many others are focused on supporting partnerships, particularly on key issues that affect Missouri military families. There's just no way to say it. That's at the top of the list in our state. Director Hall talked a few moments ago about hiring vets. That's just one of the programs that's available here, but there is definitely a focus. So one of the first things that I want to point out was that Missouri was one of the first 10 charter members of the Interstate Compact to support the United States Army. That's an achievement that we're awfully proud of, and we continue to be a part of it. But our state programs and our state law also are doing other things that are reported on by the Department of Defense report card on what military life is like in the various states. And some of the measures are here, and we've accomplished all these things. We have facilitated spouses transitioning to unemployment compensation. That's one of the important national measures. We have minimized the school disruption for military children during transition and deployment, and we have promoted the enforcement of predatory lending regulations, all national goals that we have adopted here in Missouri. And then finally, one that a lot of people don't know about is we've comported with DOD rules on the disposition of deceased individuals. Those are all extremely important factors that the Department of Defense does track. Go to the next slide, please. And with good leadership on the part of our General Assembly, we're going to hear about that just in a few moments, and also our governor in Missouri, we have legislation pending in Jefferson City that will address many of the remaining issues that will fill out our report card completely. Among those are making sure that licensure and academic credit are portable, making sure that absentee voting is easier and more transparent, making sure that veterans treatment courts are available and that it is clear who's eligible, and then finally making sure that we've waived the required waiting time to establish residency for obtaining certain in-state tuition. Those are all issues that are on our radar screen. The General Assembly is working on them just as hard as they possibly can, and I wanted to make sure that I listed them here. We are a military-friendly state. We're a military-friendly region, and one of the ways we show that we're a military-friendly state is we enact good law and put good programs in place. Go to the next slide, please. I mentioned a few moments ago compacts, that we were part of a compact effort. We're also part of what are called community covenants. If you recall, the Army, during a previous Secretary of the Army's service, and also during the current Secretary's service, has stressed making sure that our Army installations get out into their communities and sign formal agreements called covenants to agree on cooperation. Well, Fort Leonard Wood has done a great job with that, and the communities and our state government have done a great job in responding. So we have some 16 covenants that exist between Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri cities, businesses, universities, and school districts, and 3 covenants that exist with the state of Missouri. I don't know where that ranks nationally, but 19 covenants that Fort Leonard Wood has signed with governments, businesses, cities, state government, that has to be way up the list. The covenant program, as you know, fosters very effective state and community partnerships, and the idea was to show a formal commitment to the Army, to soldiers and their families. We've done that in spades, and I'm very, very happy to point it out. Please go to the next slide. Well, speaking of partnerships, many of you here in this room are part of organizations that support Fort Leonard Wood. I certainly am, and most of us in the room are part of some organization that has some piece of caring for soldiers, families, and the mission here at Fort Leonard Wood, and this is a picture of them. So you'll see at the county level, we have the Committee of 50, Friends of the Fort, our local Chamber of Commerce, and Phelps for the Fort. Wonderful organizations that didn't just start yesterday. They've been here for many years and will continue to be here. At the regional level, I mentioned the Sustainable Ozarks Partnership a few moments ago, which we've just formed in the last year, that's looking at issues that are important in the communities in a way that's parallel to the Army's interest in sustainability. The Sustainable Ozarks Partnership, or SOP, has gotten off the ground, we think, faster than any similar organization at any other Army installation in the country. We're late to the game, but we've caught up. The Association of the U.S. Army, Fort Leonard Wood Mid-Missouri chapter, which was, as I'll show you in a few moments, the best chapter nationally in 2012. And then finally, at the state level, has been recognized the Missouri Military Preparedness and Enhancement Commission, which is the state's primary way of intersecting with the needs of Fort Leonard Wood and its community. Go to the next slide, please. This is shameless. This is a shameless kind of representation of something here that we're all proud of, which is AUSA. I said a moment ago that it was the national best chapter in its population category for the year 2012. About 2,000 individual members and over 200 corporate members. It does things like fund the Wounded Warrior Fund grant program, gives out lots of money, $100,000 to warriors and their families in times of crisis, particularly those that just pop up, some emergency. And then finally, it supports the Warriors in Town program, which is essentially off the installation to make sure that those wounded warriors get connected with the community and can come back into it. Really wonderful, wonderful AUSA. Go to the next slide, please. In my opening, I talked about land use. Land use is an extremely important issue we know in this process, and we are going through, go to the next slide, please. Oops. We get them out of order. Please back up there if you would. Oh, no, we got it. That's the right one. I'm sorry. I skip slides. Recreation. Recreation is important. I got ahead of myself. Recreation is a part of quality of life. Recreation is being able to go to a lake, a river, being able to do what you want in the outdoors or inside. So we have Lake of the Ozarks, not very far away. In this county, in this area, we have wonderful streams, canoeing, fishing, golf. We have world-famous Branson music and access to theme parks that's not very far away. Local shopping and festivals here. It's a small-town environment, which is really great. But on the other hand, we're one of the few states in the country that it has 2 professional baseball teams, 2 professional